So, the Thunderdome cage match. It is, I've written, overbooked and confusing. And it sort of was. There's a Terminator. So this is Ole Anderson and who's managing, and Gary Hart. They're the Terminators. They both have a towel, and it's, whoever throws the towel in for their team, etc. And then the Thunderdome is also apparently electrified. At any point while watching this match, did you see anyone get electrified on it? Was it made clear to you when you watched this that this was definitely going to be electrified?
No, I mean, see, again, it's just so reflective of WCW at this time. Like, first of all, the phrase Terminators. At this time, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie is very well known, and you got two guys on the outside and throwing a towel, and it's not very Terminator-esque, in the naming of it. But they would just throw this stuff out there. Like, let's say the ring's electrified and there's a pit of sharks underneath it and this and that. We're never going to show it, so we don't have to worry about it. And not realizing that for the wrestlers going in there and actually working inside that ring, it's and I think let's go down that vein for a second. Let's say the wrestlers were pretending it was electrified. That would have been a little bit like Laurel and Hardy, wouldn't it? Like getting zapped, like zipping around the ring and everything. Almost like the bug zapper, and knowing WCW, they probably would have panned in some loud, like the operation game. Those things they would do like that, and you'd wonder. It's like my criticism of Dixie, like this talking down to the fans, like the fans, they're so stupid, they'll buy that. Just say it, and then put no thought into it, whether the workers are selling that or. You have an electrician down at ringside ready to cut the power, whatever, because it's now going to take resources, not many, but it's going to take some number of dollars to put that in and make it work that way. And instead of just not saying it, it's a steel cage. And what I didn't like about the cage, and I've never liked about cages, is when they have the cage on the floor like that. And then there's this area around the ring you can walk, because it's very difficult to shoot. It's difficult for the wrestlers to move around in. You can't use the cage from inside the ring because it's 3 feet away, 4 feet away. It just makes for an odd-looking stage as opposed to like the traditional style cage where it's literally 12 inches past the rope. And the other part of this is that steel. Those are like legit steel bars. Like that wasn't a rubber cage or whatever. And yet you have, the guys trying to utilize it, but they can't get to it. But the few places they did, and yet we see, a lack of color and, this whole idea of the electrified ring and everything. It just made the whole thing seem so cartoonish, and approach. And that was the comical thing about that, or the sad thing about it, is that at the time, WCW was trying to draw the parallel between them and WWE, or F then. That they're the entertaining guys, they're the cartoon guys, ours are the wrestler guys, and yet we see this kind of stuff, and it's just cornball looking.
It's funny that you mentioned actually that the cage that encompasses the entire ring and then some of the floor as well, but we see this in Hell in a Cell now, which uses it to great effect because it's the entire floor, so you've got room to move and room to work. I've seen cages like we're talking about the Thunderdome, but I've seen other cages similar where it sort of cuts half of the ring apron off, so then the outside you can't really do anything, and then as you say, it can look a bit cumbersome. Also, because I'm so glad you mentioned this about the cage and the production of it. I've never seen a cage match live in an audience. I've seen a good few wrestling matches and shows and everything, but never a cage match. Do you think a cage match hurts the audience enjoyment because, depending on the sort of configuration of the bars or the mesh or whatever, people are constantly trying to move and trying to see what's going on if they're like far away?
Sure. Yeah, it's again, that's an old Steamboat thing, right? Sell to the guy in the last row. He's got the crappiest seat in the place, but if he can see you and what you're selling, everybody in between's going to. But you're right. When I think of what you're talking about there, I think of like when I would go to concerts as a kid, they would have obstructed view seats, right? And sit down, there's a big pillar right here. You're trying to see the concert. Yeah, it is cumbersome. I think it's fine for television or pay-per-views because you've got a camera that can get up tight and show the point of view. But in some place the larger arenas and larger stadiums, like the PPG building in Pittsburgh, holds, I think, 21,000. It's a gigantic arena and far bigger than the old Civic Arena, about 4,000 or 5,000 seats. And I'd taken my kids to see Green Day there a few years back. And same thing, we didn't have horrible seats, but I mean, the people on the stage looked this big. It was like you're like looking through a telephoto lens or something. So yes, it definitely obstructs the view. And keep in mind, you've got thousands and thousands of people. Also, the guy in front of you is doing this, and so you keep trying to find the sweet spot. And that cage in particular, because the old style cages, like the fencing cage, from a distance, it's almost like the cage disappears. You still pretty well see through that. But these heavy bars and corners and roofs and everything on this thing just certainly detracts from the viewership of it. And just one thing pointed out in here, those kind of rings, when they started raising, popping up in the business in the 80s, in Galveston, Texas, that's where Sting blew his knee out. Because he was running, and I forget who was in the ring working. Sting went running down and went to take a leap to jump onto the cage so he could climb up it. But one of those legit steel bars hit him right in the kneecap and tore his knee. So they could also be dangerous because, again, we're used to working in the other kind. And then you go into something like that. And I agree with you, Hell in a Cell setting up the premise like that. And then you had guys like Mick and Undertaker that set that standard, and later Shawn, could go in and really utilize the cage in a way that we hadn't seen it used before. But these cages had just made their debut, and not the best effort from WCW.